Hello everyone and welcome to this week's writing Q&A video. My name is KM Weiland and I run the writing website helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And this week's question is from Gaurav Acharya, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, who asks, "Thank you for doing these videos, they are really helpful. I had a question. What do you do to get into the heads of your characters, especially those with a lie that you don't necessarily relate to?" So first of all, what he's referencing here as the lie is the lie the character believes, or the limiting belief with which a character starts out the story and may or may not overcome over the course of that story, depending on what kind of character arc they're following. If they're following a positive change arc, then they are likely to evolve out of this limiting lie and into a broader truth that allows them to function better within the world that they live in. So this is a good question. I tapped this a little bit in last week's video in talking about how do we access and use our subjective experiences to create stories that can objectively connect with many different readers. And the simple answer to this is that the magic of fiction is that we get to explore characters and perspectives and situations that we very likely have, nothing in common with in our real lives. I mean, many of us are writing sooner or later in our fiction about, villains and characters who are exploring moral gray areas, or maybe just, outright crimes or reprehensible acts. And not to mention, emotions that can be very difficult, such as grief and suffering and hatred, things like that, which are certainly universal to the human experience, but that we all experience to varying degrees. And many of us in the ordinary course of our normal lives won't encounter many of these extremes that we do get to explore in our fiction. And really that's the cathartic power of fiction, is that it gets to go to these extreme places and we can kind of play and experiment in a way and experience these situations and emotions when in a way that is a lot less stressful or even dangerous than it would be in our real lives. Still, this is a completely valid question. How do you bring to life basically a dimensional character who is quite different from you, or perhaps who represents mindsets that A, maybe you've never experienced yourself, or B, that you yourself find reprehensible? And I think the simplest thing here is to simply realize that even if you don't relate to or want to relate to a lie that a character has, let's just say simply that the character is a hateful person who hates something, and you don't relate to that, and you don't want that to be something that you yourself identify with. But I think the simple fact that you are writing this and you are drawn to write about it at whatever level does indicate that there's something in you that is wanting to explore it. It doesn't mean that you yourself are manifesting the behaviors and traits associated with it, but it allows you the opportunity to really dig into the shadow and see what's there, see what's available for you to explore about things that are maybe taboo, that are maybe scary. And that really that's really the glory of fiction, right? That's the tremendous power and gift that fiction gives to us, whether we're writing it or whether we're reading it, is that it prompts us to explore the parts of ourselves that we don't know yet. And that is helpful not just in broadening ourselves and being able to gain the gifts, but also in being able to go into the shadow and explore the parts of ourselves that we've disowned, that frighten us. And perhaps there's pieces of ourselves down there that we've lost that are objectively great, like personal empowerment and that kind of thing. But it can also be parts of ourselves that are very scary and that we do not want to own. That we would much rather project onto the villains in the world and in our stories. But I think when we are able to really go there, really realize that the very fact that this is showing up at all means there is something in us that relates and correlates to us, and digging deep to find what that is, asking the hard questions, to go really deep and to be too honest in inhabiting this character. And the other thing is simply realizing the very act of writing fiction is the perfect exercise for doing this, because it allows you to tap that deep part of yourself, that subconscious, and the root of the road to the collective unconscious, where these things do live and where we do have access to them, whether we are necessarily aware of them or using them, accessing them in our day-to-day life. But by using the fiction as sort of a meditative experience in itself, that we can go really deep and we can discover things about ourselves and about the emotions that we're trying to convey, the perspectives that we think we don't understand. It's an amazing way to really go deep with perspectives that we do feel antipathy for, and trying to discover the humanity in it and understand the motivations behind it, to find the parts of ourselves that do understand it, that are in sympathy with it, which, even if it is something truly reprehensible that we would rightfully condemn in the external world, it gives us perspective and the ability not just for compassion in interacting with people who perhaps do hold opposing viewpoints, but also in working through it, in reclaiming those parts of our shadow and integrating in a way that brings us to greater wholeness, and that we can then share that in our fiction. So I think using your fiction simply as an exploration, you don't have to have it all figured out when you go into it, but use it as a testing ground, to really explore this and to ask yourself, if I was this person, if I did believe this, what would motivate that? What actions would that prompt? It can be extremely helpful. And also, at the end of the day, if you feel like you do not, like you can't find that level of sympathy with whatever it is, that level of understanding with the lie that you're trying to explore for your character, then very possibly it's not the right lie for this character for you to write at this time. And being able to be honest about that too. It may not be something that has enough juice, enough friction in your own life to be interesting for you to explore. And if that's true, it's not necessarily something that you have to. And if you try to force it, it can end up feeling like a plot device. So I think too, being willing to be honest about the pieces of your own experience that you really do want to explore, and not feeling like you have to go to places for the sake of the story that really aren't that interesting, that you're only doing because it seems like that would be convenient for the plot. So it is about finding that sweet spot between how deep can you go and what can you discover about yourself and your own experience and your ability to write characters that maybe you didn't know about, and recognizing that this really isn't something you're interested in. This doesn't light you up. It's not something where there's like an exciting level of authenticity for you to explore and experience. So ultimately, this is the dance of writing fiction, of being interested in the things we don't know about other people, and therefore ultimately about ourselves, and being able to go internal and explore and ask questions. I always like to look at fiction not as someplace where we seek answers, but as a forum for asking questions. So ask the questions, and you never know what good things you may find. So I hope that's helpful. And if you would like to ask a question for next week's video, please leave that in the comments down below. If you'd like to stay connected with me and all the content I produce, the best way to do that is via my mailing list, which you can sign up for at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And I will see you again next week.